What would you do if the woman you loved drove away and left you stranded at a gas station, just walked out? No warning, no fight, no goodbye. Most men would stand there stunned, waiting for it to make sense. But not him, not this time. The Arizona heat blurred the horizon like a fever dream. Asphalt, shimmering wind, whispering secrets through dry weeds. He stood there with the pump still in his hand, watching the SUV vanish into the sun, a taillight blinking like an afterthought. His wallet was in the glove box. The kids were in the back seat. 3 minutes. That's how long it took for the silence to morph into something else, something sharp. Not confusion, not fear, rage. But this wasn't the kind of rage that shouts. No, this was the slow-burning ancestral kind, the one buried deep in men who've bitten their tongues too long, who've stood in doorways with questions caught in their throats. The kind that makes you dangerous, not because you lose control, but because you gain it. You want to judge him, don't you? You think this is one of those stories where he's the one who pushed her away, that maybe he cheated, maybe he yelled too much, worked too late, loved too little. That's easier for you, because the idea that she was the villain, that she could smile while holding the knife behind her back, that doesn't sit well with the way we're told love stories work. But let's rewind. They hadn't spoken much that morning. She'd ordered a matcha latte, eyes glued to her phone, thumbs moving fast. He told the kids to buckle up, wiped crumbs off the dashboard. It was their 5th road trip that year, more silence than scenery. Marriage had become an endless string of logistics. Who packed the charger? Who booked the Airbnb? Whose turn it was to apologize? She used to look at him like he held the map to everything that mattered. Now she looked through him. He had become furniture, convenient, steady, ignored. And maybe that was the point. He didn't see it coming, no. But if he was honest, something in him had stopped looking. Maybe because looking hurt. Because what you see you can't unsee. She pulled over at the Chevron near mile marker 184. Said she had to pee. He offered to pump the gas. The kids argued in the back seat about who touched whose fries. She didn't look back. When the car door slammed shut, he felt it. Not air, not sound, something else, something final. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Then he saw the SUV, their SUV roll past the glass doors of the convenience store. Her sunglasses on, music loud, her profile cold as marble. She didn't even slow down. She left him with no phone, no wallet, no way to scream. But she forgot something. She forgot who she married. She forgot the man he was before he made himself small enough to fit into her life. And maybe, just maybe, she forgot the kind of man who learns to wait. Quiet. Watching. Gathering storms in his chest. So he started walking. Not in circles, not back to the store to call someone. He walked toward the highway. Toward a plan that was already writing itself in the back of his mind like fire across dry fields. Because when someone leaves you without warning, they don't expect you to follow. But he wouldn't follow. He'd arrive, and when he did, he wouldn't come empty-handed. It took him 3 hours to get back into town. 3 blistering, dust-choked hours, his feet grinding against gravel, and his pulse a low, relentless drumbeat. He didn't hitchhike. He didn't call a friend. No one even knew what had happened yet. That's how betrayal works sometimes, silent, surgical, precise. She didn't want him stranded. She wanted him forgotten. And the kids? You think she was going to keep them. That's the part that should terrify you, because people imagine villains as reckless, messy, unhinged, but the worst kind, the truly dangerous ones. They're calculated. Sweet smiles, clean kitchens, perfect Instagram captions. She didn't take the kids to protect them. She took them to punish him. But something inside him had already snapped free. By the time he reached the edge of their neighborhood, the sun had begun to crawl behind the rooftops. Long shadows spilled across lawns, sprinklers hissed like snakes in the grass, and there it was, their driveway. The SUV parked perfectly as if nothing had happened, as if that gas station never existed, as if he hadn't been erased in broad daylight. He stood across the street for a full minute, just breathing, watching. Then he crossed, unlocked through the side gate. The code was still the same. She hadn't changed it. Not yet. That was her mistake. That and underestimating what a man remembers when he's been made to feel invisible. Inside, the house smelled like lavender detergent and cold chicken. The television buzzed in the living room. Cartoons, laughter. His daughter's voice, soft, high-pitched, singing off key. His son's giggle, normalcy weaponized. And her, she was in the kitchen, drinking wine, on the phone, probably spinning the story already. Probably saying he just walked off. I don't know what happened. He's been distant lately. He didn't speak when he walked in. He didn't need to. She turned mid-sentence, the color draining from her face as if she'd seen a ghost. For a moment, her lips parted. Maybe she thought he would scream, plead, beg to know why. But he didn't give her that. Instead, he walked past her, straight to the kids, sat on the couch between them, held them, like anchors, like proof. "Daddy, where did you go?" his daughter asked, curling into his side. "I went to get you," he said simply. And something in her expression shifted. She believed him. Because kids always know. Not the details, but the energy, the truth humming beneath the lies. And they had felt the tremor in the car, hadn't they? The quiet violence of her silence. The way she didn't answer when they asked where Daddy went. The way she said, "He'll figure it out." He kissed their foreheads and looked back at her. She was trembling, but not in fear, not yet. This was something else, uncertainty, the cracks in her mask beginning to form. Because people like her thrive on confusion. And when you stop giving them that, when you stop reacting, they lose grip. "You left," he said finally, "so I came home." "You don't live here anymore," she whispered, gripping her wine glass too tightly. "I never left," he replied. "You just stopped looking." He stood then, calm, collected, and walked to the garage. The spare keys were still in the drawer. The papers were in the file cabinet, joint custody, equal rights. She couldn't deny it. Not legally. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just packed. 2 duffel bags, the kids' backpacks, toothbrushes, teddy bears, pajamas. She followed him room to room like a ghost protesting with the kind of frail outrage that only works when the other person still cares. But he didn't. Not anymore. You ever see a man who's done begging? It's not loud. It's terrifyingly quiet. It's a mirror held up to every lie you told him every time you twisted his patience into weakness. At the door, she grabbed his arm. "You can't just take them." He looked at her with the kind of calm that ends wars. "I didn't. You left us." And with that, he stepped into the night, children in tow, the garage light casting long shadows behind them. The car, his car, now hummed to life. He drove slow, deliberate, with the kind of peace that only comes when you finally understand sometimes the most powerful revenge is survival. The motel wasn't much. Faded neon, rust-colored carpet, a Coke machine that ate your quarters. But it had 2 beds and a lock on the door. That was enough. He tucked the kids in that first night with a tenderness that felt almost unfamiliar, like he was remembering how to be whole again. They were restless at first. Change makes children twitch in their sleep. But he held their hands until the breathing evened out, until the tension in their tiny limbs melted into trust. And then he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for hours. This wasn't the story he thought he'd be telling at 38. He had done everything by the book, hadn't he? Showed up, stayed loyal, took the hits, believed that love was sacrifice even when it bled him dry. But when did the sacrifices start to look like self-erasure? You think you know what kind of man leaves? But this was different. He didn't leave her. She left him long before the gas station. Left him in the silence between her clipped replies. Left him every time she chose to perform perfection instead of practicing intimacy. Left him in bed. Left him in the kitchen. Left him behind his own eyes. That's the worst kind of abandonment, the one that happens while you're still standing next to each other. And maybe you've felt it too. Maybe you've sat at a dinner table where your partner laughs louder for strangers than they ever do for you. Maybe you've had to ask twice, 3 times, 5 times, "What's wrong?" only to be told "I'm fine," while the distance between you became an unbridgeable continent. So he stayed, until staying meant disappearing. And that's what no one tells you. Some people don't explode, they evaporate. Drip by drip, nod by nod, silence by silence. In the morning, he took the kids to a diner, ordered pancakes with smiley faces drawn in syrup. Their laughter filled the booth like a bomb, like proof that joy can still grow in cracked soil. He didn't tell them everything, just enough, just what they needed to feel safe. Back at the motel, his phone buzzed, a new number. He let it ring. Then came the texts. "You're being dramatic. They're my children too. You always twist everything." Ah, there it was, the script. The projection, the gaslighting, the subtle flip from abuser to victim, as if he was the one who left someone stranded in the desert, as if he was the storm, not the wreckage left behind. You ever notice how quickly someone tries to rewrite the story when you stop letting them hold the pen? But he wasn't interested in her narrative anymore. That afternoon he called a lawyer, quietly, methodically. the way someone boards up windows before a hurricane. She'd make it messy, he knew that. But he had facts, receipts, and now he had resolve. When the court battle began, she wore her best face. You know the one, pearls, pastels, tears carefully timed. She spoke of his anger, his unpredictability, her concern for the children's emotional safety. But what happens when you lie to people who actually listen? The judge watched her, asked pointed questions, asked why she never filed a report, why there were no witnesses, why her ex seemed composed, cooperative, and consistent. She blinked, flinched, bluffed, and slowly the house of cards began to tremble. One night, weeks later, she called again. This time her voice was softer, almost human. "I didn't mean to scare you, I just needed space." He said nothing. "I just thought if you saw what life would be like without me, you'd fall in line," he finished for her. Silence. "You never really wanted a partner," he said. "You wanted an audience." The truth hung between them like smoke. She asked if they could reset, talk, rebuild. She missed the family, the routine, the safety net she once cut so cleanly. But the thing about bridges, once they burn, the light reveals everything. And he had seen too much. "You taught me something," he told her. "You taught me who I never want to be." And he hung up, not out of anger, but clarity, because the most dangerous kind of freedom is the one you earn by walking through the fire someone else set for you. She didn't stop. When they lose control, they escalate. Emails turn to voicemails. Voicemails turn to threats laced in sugar. "I think the kids miss me." "Don't you want them to have a mother?" The words dripped like honey over a blade. But he saw it for what it was, desperation, not love. The fear of losing her throne. Because that's the thing about someone who's played the hero in their own fiction for too long. They forget that other people remember the truth. And her truth. It wasn't tantrums. It was precision. 1,000 micro-wounds carved out over time. A sigh that dismissed. A roll of the eyes that cut. Love rationed like currency, only doled out when he was compliant enough to earn it. And still he'd tried. My God, how he tried. Birthdays planned, dinners cooked, arguments swallowed. He learned to read her moods like weather patterns, walked on eggshells, kept the peace, not for himself, but for the children, for the illusion. But illusions once shattered don't reassemble, they scatter. The court granted him temporary custody. It wasn't a victory march, it was a quiet nod to truth, the kind that isn't shouted but etched into documents and decisions and visitation schedules. She fought it, of course, cried in parking lots, posted cryptic messages online, played the part. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she texted one night. "Kids always come back to the parent who loves them." He didn't reply, because he knew something she didn't. Children don't come back to performance. They come back to presence. And he had become a fortress of that presence. Every morning he packed their lunches, left notes inside with little jokes only they understood. He brushed hair. He listened when they cried. He said no when he needed to. He held the line. Soft where they needed comfort. Strong where they needed safety. Some nights after bedtime, he'd sit on the back porch and just breathe. The air felt different now. Heavy, sure, but honest. And what about her? She spiraled quietly. Behind the facade, behind the lawyer's smiles and the "I'm doing great" actually Instagram captions, there was a woman unraveling. Because she had built her identity on control, and when that control was gone, she was nothing but shadows in an empty house. She didn't know how to parent without performing. She didn't know how to love without conditions. And love, as it turns out, was the one thing the children could feel without being told. Weeks passed, then months, and the kids stopped asking when they'd go back. That's the part no one talks about, how children grieve their own disillusionment, how they slowly piece together the difference between being wanted and being used, how a quiet ride home with a steady parent becomes more sacred than any sugar-coated apology. But maybe the most profound transformation wasn't in the children. It was in him, because the man who once shrank to keep the peace had become someone else entirely. Someone who no longer explained himself, who didn't flinch when accused, who didn't second-guess his worth in someone else's silence. He remembered who he was before her voice took root in his head, and more importantly, he remembered who he was without it. One evening during a school recital, he saw her again. She showed up 15 minutes late, sat in the back, wore sunglasses indoors. When their daughter took the stage, she looked toward the crowd, and she smiled. Not at the back row, at him, straight down the aisle. He smiled back, warm and rooted, not triumphant, just true. That night she sent one last message. "You turned them against me." And he finally answered, "No, you just ran out of mirrors." It rained the day the final custody order arrived. The kind of slow, drizzling rain that doesn't wash things clean, just makes everything quiet, as if the sky itself had paused to listen. He stood at the kitchen counter, the letter trembling slightly in his hands, not from fear, not from doubt, but from the still unfamiliar feeling of justice. Full custody, not temporary, not conditional. Final. He exhaled like a man coming up from deep water, the kind of breath that stretches the lungs and cracks the ribs and says, "You're free now." The kids were at school, their shoes still lined up neatly by the door, their drawings taped to the fridge, unicorns and robots and stick figure families with wide, toothy smiles. And him. Always him, drawn front and center. Taller now. She had faded in their stories, not out of hatred, but out of relevance. That's how children process grief, not with fists, but with silence. They stop talking about you when it hurts too much to explain what you stopped being. She had visitation rights, of course, supervised, bi-weekly, but even then she rarely showed up, and when she did it was always the same. Late, distracted, trying too hard, carrying store-bought apologies in gift bags and compliments wrapped in guilt. She'd kneel beside them and say, "Mommy missed you so much," and the kids would nod, unsure what to do with love that only arrived when it was convenient. One day after a visit, his son asked, "Why doesn't Mom remember what I like?" He had no answer. Because some wounds are so old they stop bleeding and just stay open. She wasn't evil. She was empty. A woman who had mistaken attention for affection, control for care. She'd never learned to pour into someone without measuring what she'd get back. And in her absence, something beautiful began to bloom. The house changed. Not physically, but energetically. Laughter lived in the walls again. Dinner was messy and loud and filled with stories about cafeteria drama and weird science experiments. There were dance parties in the kitchen, forts made of blankets, arguments over what movie to watch that ended in popcorn and compromise. He didn't try to replace her, didn't badmouth her, didn't need to, because he had learned something that most people never do. When you heal, you don't have to convince anyone of who you are, your presence does the work. But still, on some nights, the past knocked quietly, when the kids were asleep, when the world was still. He'd sit in their room watching them breathe, and wonder how close he came to losing everything. And you sitting there reading this, maybe you think he was lucky. Maybe you think, at least it didn't get worse. But ask yourself, how many people never get that letter in the mail? How many stay at the gas station, emotionally, spiritually, waiting for someone who left them to circle back? How many of you have handed over your soul in pieces thinking love meant sacrifice, and that eventually they'd see your worth? Let me tell you something brutal and true. They won't. Not if they've built their identity on your silence. Not if they need you small to feel big. Not if every act of kindness you give them just becomes another mirror they refuse to look into. He didn't win because she lost. He won because he remembered who he was, what he deserved, and what his children needed. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need her to suffer. He needed peace. And in the end, peace looks a lot like 2 backpacks by the door, cereal bowls in the sink, and the sound of your daughter singing in the shower off-key and fearless. That's power. That's closure. And her, she still posts cryptic quotes about narcissists and toxic masculinity and fake fathers. But the likes get fewer each week, because people always tire of stories that don't change, especially when the villain keeps casting herself as the victim. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.